So I've actually been overhauling my note-taking system in the past 2 weeks. So instead of using notebooks, I've actually been using slips of paper or cards, kind of like this. Then every card is just one idea. The idea could be coming from a book, a journal, from a YouTube video, basically any kind of content or any source of content. And this system is basically derived off or based from the Zettelkasten method or the Zettelkasten system. And Zettelkasten is basically a German word which means slip box. So Zettel is a slip or a slip of paper, kind of like this. And then Kasten is the box where you store all of the slips of paper. So Zettelkasten is actually invented by a sociologist researcher called Niklas Luhmann, who became extremely productive in his career. I think he wrote like 70 books and more than 400 research papers in his lifetime thanks to his system. So how does his system work? So whenever he encounters a concept from a journal or a book that he reads, he summarizes this in his own words on one side of the paper, and then on the back side of the paper he would put the bibliography details of that note. And there are also other kinds of notes that he would create and put into his Zettelkasten, such as his own ideas and insights that he derives through making connections between all of these pieces of knowledge that he has accumulated. And then over time, the increasing richness of all of these references and personal insights will basically form the basis of all of his publications, and that's why he was so incredibly productive throughout his career. So the first difference that you will notice between the original system and my system is that the original system actually placed a heavy emphasis on writing, which makes sense because it was originally created to produce publications, so articulating ideas in your own words is like so important. But because I don't necessarily need to publish anything, and because I'm a very visual thinker, it's so much more useful for me if all of my notes are visual notes that basically encapsulates ideas into drawings or patterns or a sketch that makes it easier for me to understand and to retain. The other thing that I did was I wrote down all of my topics of interests, whether they are like the fields of research that I do, my work, or things that I'm passionate or curious about. And you'll also notice that I color-coded them, and this color code will be useful for me to organize all of my notes, which you will see in a second. And then every topic also gets its own bibliography, which is basically a slip of paper containing the list of books on this topic that I've already read or that I want to read. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a book. It could be a YouTube video or a research journal or a website. And then in each slip, I would include a numbering system and then the title, and then just the code for what format it's in. Like, for example, B is for book, and then the author, and then the year. And then I basically do the same thing for the rest of the topics. And then similar to the Zettelkasten system, I also have two general kinds of notes. So the first notes are also like the more bibliographic notes or like reference notes, which are ideas that I took from other sources. So this is one example. And then as you'll notice, I basically sketched out that idea or turned that idea into a sketch that I can understand. And then I added a title describing this idea. And then at the corner is basically the code, which I will link back to its respective bibliography. So this is one thing that I also did different because, again, I'm not using this for research, so I don't necessarily want to constantly write and rewrite bibliography details at the back of each note. All I want to do is just put a quick code which will link me back to the actual source. And then the second kind of note which I make are again similar to what he does, which are my own ideas, my own thoughts, my own insights. And just like the bibliographic notes or reference notes, I also sketch it out as much as possible because I guess that's just how I think. And sometimes if I want, I could put additional notes on the back. And again, I would put a title to describe what this idea is all about. And then every idea also gets its own code, which I will also consolidate in its own index, which is again a separate slip of paper. So every topic actually gets two indexes, kind of like two bibliographies. So the first is actually bibliography from books and other resources, and then the other is like an index for my own ideas. You will also notice that I made my code as simple as possible. So all the topics, as I mentioned, gets its own color code, but it also gets its own letter code. And then I will put the title, the code, and then the letter of the header on each index. And then when I write my actual code on every strip of paper, all I do is I just follow the letter, follow the color, and then follow the numbering system. There's also another very important feature to the Zettelkasten, which is the linking method. So what happens is that if you have another idea that is kind of connected to one idea, then you would write down at the corner to indicate like the code or the linking system of those related ideas. This is the part where I'm still trying to figure out, and I didn't actually put it here now in my current notes because I haven't actually accumulated enough notes yet to start linking things together. But what I hope is that this will eventually become my second brain of connected information and ideas, so I can store knowledge and think externally through visuals and through sketching. So how do I actually implement this system when I'm reading something? So whenever I'm going to sit down and read, I basically come armed with a stack of blank notes and then a pencil. I also bring my bibliography cards in case there's a book mentioned by the author that I want to check out later, so that I could write that down and then basically read it later on. And then of course, I will also put the bibliographic notes of the book that I'm reading into the respective card. And then as I go through my book, if there is an idea or a concept that jumps out at me, I'll take a card and then I quickly sketch out that idea and put down the title and then just put it aside. I actually don't want to spend so much time on drafting a sketch because I kind of want to maintain my reading momentum, and that's why I used a pencil to sketch so that it's okay to make mistakes. And then once I'm finished reading for the day, I'll consolidate all the sketch notes and then turn them into permanent notes by actually using a pen to ink the final note. And then I add in the respective code and then I file it away. So just a few days ago, I had a working discussion with my husband. I wanted to share with him like some of my insights and ideas related to watershed restoration. And what I did was I basically pulled out the relevant cards that might be useful, and then I arranged them in a logical sequence that kind of follows my train of thought. And then I used those cards for our discussion, which was quite helpful because it's not just words, but there's also images. So this is actually one way that I discovered that I can actually use it apart from, building my second brain. But because this is still a bit new, I'm also looking forward to other use cases that come up. So the question is, why don't I just take notes in a notebook? And that's actually how I've been doing it for pretty much all of my life. The problem with using a notebook for me is that it gets filled up linearly, which makes it tedious to find what I put in old notebooks because everything is chronological. But it's also difficult to form connections between old notes. Not to mention that I could be studying or taking notes of the same things after a few years because I've already forgotten about it or I forgot where I put it. So it's kind of like having to relearn it again. Whereas in this new system, because nothing is arranged linearly, I can just keep adding more and more details. Where there are gaps, I can add more ideas, and I could basically build up my own understanding and my own thoughts on each topic so that my external brain on each topic just gets richer over time as opposed to redundant or obsolete. So earlier in the beginning, I already mentioned I'm a visual thinker, so hence I prefer to take visual notes or create visual systems because that's just how my brain works, I guess. Whether or not it actually takes more time for me to sketch my notes rather than write it down, I guess it depends on a case-by-case basis. But in the first place, I usually don't like to add an unnecessary level of detail to my sketches beyond what is actually needed to convey the idea. So my approach to sketching is more like trying to figure out like what this idea looks like as an organizational pattern rather than doodling a lot of pictures. So in a way, I'm actually following the original recommendation of making Zettel notes, in which it should be concise but with enough information to convey context and meaning, even if I would read it years later. So technically, I'm trying to do the same thing only with sketches. And also, if you think about it, like it's like what they say, a picture can say 1,000 words. So in many cases, it's actually faster for me to sketch out an essence of the idea rather than elaborate or articulate the same thing in the text. So one unexpected benefit or effect that I'm starting to see ever since the short time that I've implemented it was that I can actually remember information better. I know that sounds weird, and I think it may not necessarily be because I'm using like a Zettelkasten or a Slipbox concept. I think it's more because my notes are visual. So in my mind's eye, I could literally see the idea in totality. Sometimes I can see the card, which is actually easier for my brain to do as opposed to remember a string of words or a string of abstract ideas. And I also remember reading about the science behind this. So what I remember is that basically in the past thousands of years, the human brain has evolved to map and remember spaces or pictures and visuals so much better than abstract concepts like words or numbers. And this is because like early humans had to read a landscape and map the terrain for their own survival, like to remember where to find food or water, or remember places to avoid like potential predator habitats or territories, etc. And this is also why a lot of memory techniques involve attaching an abstract concept, word or name or number to a very striking visual image or a certain room in a mind palace. So many memory techniques are actually visual or visual based, pictorial based. And I guess that's because of how the brain innately works, evolutionary speaking. So in a way, I guess I have indirectly applied this technique in my own note-taking system. So hopefully my memory of what I've learned will also improve over time, but let's see. So I guess the next question is, what is the next step for me and all of these notes? Like, do I have plans to digitalize my notes? Do I plan to scan and put this up on a more permanent platform like Obsidian or Notion or all those other note-taking apps? I think the answer to that now is I'm not sure yet, because my priority as of this moment is to refine and perfect the system as much as possible while it's still in its analog form before I actually digitalize it. So right now, what is really working for me is the fact that things are very visual, it's very flexible, and then I have a freedom to play around with ideas and move things around, and those are actually the number one priorities for me. But by the way, if you have any tips on how I can achieve the same thing, the same objectives in a digital system, please feel free to let me know in the comments. And then maybe as I test things and as I go deeper into it, I can post an update video after a couple of months. And speaking of update videos, yes, I'm back from a long hiatus from YouTube. So I hope to be posting a bit more frequently now. And thanks so much everyone for your patience and for sticking around in my channel. I really, really appreciate it. In the meantime, until the next video, bye everyone.